Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Level Up Your Capital Planning Strategy. I'm Jennifer Getz, the Editorial Director of Facility Executive Magazine, and this webinar is presented by AkitaBox. Before we get started, I'll cover a few housekeeping items. Our speakers are on video today, and if you would like to view them at the top of your screen, look for the bar in your window to pull down so they are visible to you. Next, please note the control panel on your screen. This is where you can submit questions via the question box at any time. There will be a Q&A portion after this presentation, so please type your questions in there to send them to us. If at any time you experience a technical difficulty, please send us a message via that question section and someone on our team will answer you privately. Also, please note the orange arrow on the left side of your control panel. As I mentioned, if you are interested in continuing education credits, please note that we receive a certificate of attendance in an email from Facility Executive after this webinar. You can report to your association for the credit. Now I'll introduce your speakers for this panel discussion. Derek Blackmore joined AkitaBox, a facility management software provider dedicated to solving the challenges and complexities of the industry in 2017 and is currently the president of the organization. From an early age, Derek has been in and around the construction industry and has developed a unique understanding of facilities and their challenges. With his experience in management as well as the construction and facility management industries, Derek understands the value of optimizing processes and technology for better overall performance. Mike Almeida is the Vice President of Sales for AkitaBox. He has been in construction and facility management technology for over 8 years. Having worked with organizations on both the construction and building owner sides, Mike is passionate about innovation and technology-driven processes to drive better efficiency in facility management. And finally, we have Dan Cooper, who brings more than 15 years working in technology and facilities management. Prior to joining AkitaBox, Dan spent more than 9 years at McKinstry, helping solve facility management challenges. Gentlemen, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. All right, let's get this thing kicked off. We're here to talk about capital planning, and I know that in our line of work, we're talking with a lot of different folks about what that means, and it looks slightly different for every person that we talk to, but at the same time, there's a lot of recurring themes that we see when we are discussing starting this capital planning process, or maybe you talk with somebody who's midstream, and there's a lot of challenges that come along with that. I was recently speaking with somebody who is starting their master planning process, and they've got a facility that was initially built in the 60s and has had 4 or 5 renovations since then. It's a bit of a Frankenstein, if you will, and they're trying to wrap their head around, where do we even start with this? What do we do in terms of making sure that we've got a good capital plan in place for the next 5, 10, 15 years for this building? But Derek, Dan, in your experience, what are some of those themes that we commonly hear when we're talking with folks?
Yeah, I think it's how do I start? I think everybody knows where they are, so they know where they start. It's a daunting task. Putting aside more recent challenges, whether it be economic or otherwise, it is just that reality is I've so often relied on whatever the source of data is, right? Tenured staff, hopes and dreams, the spreadsheet tells me, but we don't really understand it. So I think it's that is accepting there's a better way, getting into that model and stepping through it, not trying to overachieve, right? And bite off too much at once, but rather, do I have the right data to inform that plan? If not, how do I get it? How do I get it efficiently? How do I keep it in a spot where it's usable, dynamic, and not maybe in a 3-ring binder that's on my back shelf from 4 years ago? So ultimately, there's a lot of hair pulling and frustration typically in those conversations because it just seems impossible because for so long it was. But as we'll talk about today, there are some easier paths forward today for owners than there certainly were even just 2 to 3 years ago.
Yeah, and we talk about the data, right? We talk about that a lot. Dan, in your experience, how easy is it to get that data, right? Derek said, where do I start? That starting point is usually one of the hardest things to figure out. How do I know I need to do this. Where do I go to find that data? How accurate is it? What's your experience in that regard, Dan?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is, that I've run into, with watching people try to engage in this is really around who's gonna tell me what I have? Who's gonna come and collect all that data? Not only that, what technology am I going to deploy to collect that data, and how am I going to deliver that data in a way that is going to make the budgetary masters or the investment group feel comfortable with how I'm presenting it, knowing that it is a source of truth. So getting started is a challenge, because there isn't always just a single pane of glass tool out there that allows you to do all of these things in one place. There are many decisions that you have to make that require different expenses, and require multiple tools. So that is one of the biggest challenges that I've seen people face in the industry today.
I think, Dan, you mentioned a keyword that always sparks conversation: delivery of. Are we putting it in a box and handing it to someone to put it on a shelf, or can we provide the insights, data, and understanding of what we have, the condition, and the capital needs of it, whether it be a major capital asset, a facility, or a portfolio, in a way where I can see its evolution, its change over time, and that's what's evolved so rapidly in this market over the last couple of years. Now it's how do I to get started. But yeah, delivery, I think, is a big thing, and we'll talk about it more today. But delivery needs to evolve from the binder, the PDF, the thumb drive, to something that I can glean insights as my facility changes, as my capital budget changes, as my organization's priorities change. Let's be honest, some of this process is informed or sometimes mandated outside of facilities and the capital budget, but there are changes in the needs of the organization that can happen fairly quickly as it pertains to its impact on a capital plan that's going to look 5, 10, 20 years down the road.
Yeah, and speaking of that delivery too, there's another component that we haven't talked about yet, and that's the time component, right? Deliveries have due dates. So what does that look like in terms of when was the last time this data was collected? How relevant is it? If it takes too long between data collection to capital plan, is that information still accurate? Is it correct? Dan, what's that look like for you from your experience in the field?
Yeah, so I've seen a number of things happen. I've seen people deploy their in-house people to collect this data, and they have other jobs that they have to do. So it takes a significant amount of time and burden, or it puts a burden on them to collect that data. And what you find out is that, guess what? We're 9 months down the road from where we started, and we're still collecting data. Well, it's really hard to start to build a capital plan if it's taking so long to collect all the data to build that plan. So there needs to be tools and technology out there to make that process efficient in order to get to that capital plan sooner than later, because it's going to require you to have that data and all of that data, in existence in order to do that. So yeah, that's been one of the challenges. There's also where you hire a condition assessment company to do that. Well, when they deliver that to you at the end of it, what does that look like? Does that look like a binder on the shelf? Does it look like a great big condition assessment in a PDF that you put on the shelf, or you try to glean information from? Those are all things that are static. That's something that is going to be really difficult to build a capital plan off over time and create pivot points over time. So those are some of the challenges I've seen, that once they get handed off that, they don't know what to do at that point with the data that they have. They don't know what tools to deploy as well.
Dan, you remind me of one of my favorite stories. It's about 1.5 years old, but CFO was putting the capital plan together with the team, and in the time between collection of data in the facilities and completion and delivery of the report, and I want to talk about delivery of report versus delivery of value today, and what that means, several major capital assets had moved, been replaced. Things happen in the building, and there was no way to go find page 432 in that asset inventory and say, that's out, here's the new asset. But we're talking about $1 million, and in the reality of today, most organizations don't have an extra $1 million, or if they do, because that happened, make the adjustment in the plan, we can put our capital to work in other ways, achieving the mission of the organization. Those are not small surprises. those are not small impacts. And so being able to deliver value and insights should probably be our goal, not delivering a report, as that report could be 6 months old, out of date, and not worth more than the weight of it to hold the door open.
Yeah. So yeah, as a summary here, we've got organization of the collection of that data. We've got the limitations of the inaccurate facility data, the time element, which is something that gets overlooked, right? We know that we have to have a plan. We know that we have to execute, and then we put it off, and all of a sudden we're in a rush to get something done. And then once it is delivered, is that data useful, or is it disconnected? Is it something that we can actually use, or is it just going to sit in a 3-ring binder somewhere? So I think at this point, I think we're getting into our first poll question for the audience here. And Jen, I think you're going to take that.
Yes, I'd be happy to. So what is your primary challenge with facility data in capital planning? You can select one of the following options, and you have about 20 to 30 seconds.
Usually whistle the Jeopardy theme music here, but I'm interested to see what the market says here, as it is such a challenge for so many.
Seeing it pretty even across the board here.
Yeah,
Makes
no
it hard
real.
to have a conversation when all 5 are pretty equal, but I think that's probably going to help us admit that these are all major challenges.
Yeah, it does look like right now the early lead is efficiency of collection and accuracy, followed closely by access, and then honestly the other 2 are not too far behind either.
They were within 3% across the board.
Yeah. So I think we've hit a nerve, right? We've got almost an even split across these 5 main categories of main challenges. And again, like we said, there's a lot of different people that are doing this. They're coming from different starting points. Each one of these might affect you differently depending on the way that you've been able to collect that data or where you currently sit within this process. But Derek, anything jumping out at you based off these poll results?
I mean, you were just getting into it, Mike. I think that is based on where you and your organization are today. One is going to be more impactful, but what it really says to me is it is about all of this. It is a daunting challenge. And so, first, let's all admit we're here together. We all are facing the same problems. It's okay. Some of that is just accepting the reality. And then, the next part is really the conversations we're going to have, and that, people process technology data. How can we make it easier? How can we make it more valuable? How can we make it sustainable and drive value in the organization? And ultimately, based on where you are, there probably is one place where you want to focus initially, and that's the conversation that I think we'll have today. Dan, anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are all steps that are somewhat disconnected from themselves. I can see the first 2, accuracy of facility data and efficiency of data collection, kind of go step together, and they might happen within the same technology. But then it comes to the point where, like, okay, well, how do I present this data? How do I make it? How do I build a plan that is going to be actionable? And how do I, that's maybe one step that is questionable. How do you get there, after the data is collected? And then the next piece that's disconnected is the how do I keep this data current, as I'm moving along into the future, how, as I'm adding new assets, replacing assets, adding new costs to those assets, replacing them, setting preventative maintenance tasks on them. How do I retain that data so I don't have to go back and recollect it to bring my data up to speed? That's a step. And then access to facility data to make decisions. Once somebody's done a condition, let's say they've done a condition assessment for you, how does that get passed off to me? How do I manage and maintain that data? Where does it exist? That's another step that people, I think, get lost in. So all these are places where I think they're all siloed. So it's really difficult to take one step to the next in the current processes that people are taking. So that's what I have to add to that.
And Dan, I would double back a little bit, and that as an owner, you should be able to, and we're starting to see it in the conversations we have every day on this topic, but ensuring you know how, if you're hiring a third party to do that assessment, you know how they're collecting the data, how they will deliver it, and it's in a way that you and your business can consume and maintain it, to your point, right? Because this is a moment, but in 3 months, 6 months, 6 years, things change. How can I, as the owner of the building, but think of yourself as the owner of that data, how are you going to keep it up to date? And that's a big part of the evolution, the step forward here. The right data for the right people at the right time, we make the best decisions. But if it's not accessible, if it's not current, the data itself, we can't give it to the right person at the right time to make the best decision because it's out of date. And so I think as we go forward, that, you know, kind of tends to be where most folks will start as they lean into this process and finding a better way is just that, how do I keep data up to date so that my decisions can be optimized, whether it be within the annual budget or, more importantly, the capital budget.
Yeah, what I'm seeing here with these results is that people are looking at this pretty linearly, which is accurate, right? We're talking about the process of getting started. And so it starts with how efficiently can we collect it? How accurate is it once we collect it? And then the third most popular answer here is, do I have access to that information so that I can make decisions, right? So we've been talking a lot about the process, but I want to get into the next topic past this is beyond the process. What does that mean long term, right? We've been talking about the traditional FCA and what that means for folks. So Derek, I know you've presented this slide before. What does it mean when we're talking about the cost associated with that traditional FCA?
Yeah, I think for us, you know, as we look at it, if you're starting in a spot where you don't have great data, it's going to cost the same to get started, right? I need a full assessment or I need a partial assessment. That you're filling the gap, whether it be a full gap or a partial gap on the data, current data, to make those decisions. But what we've found as we have these conversations is, with process changes, with tool changes, trust me, the people come along quickly because this makes everyone's life better. Both the firm doing the assessment and the owner using this data is managing and updating your data on a regular basis in a software system, as opposed to that static deliverable where you're literally every 3 years or every 5 years doing an assessment, paying to redo the whole thing, right? Because the data has changed so much, as opposed to the fine tuning and updating as you move through the years in between what typically would have been that longer cycle between assessments. Now, I've never been the CFO, but I've worked with a number of them. It's the most dynamic conversation we're having right now. Now the CFO can actually understand, not being a facility expert, but can understand what's happening in the building as it pertains to the capital plan and the budget, and be informing the stakeholders and adjusting that plan ongoing, where otherwise it tends to feel like a pretty sudden jolt when, surprise, 3 years ago we said X, now it's X plus 5 million, or it's Y plus 30%. What do you mean 30%? I don't have that capital. Equally as concerning, right? If all of a sudden the capital budget shows significantly less assets needing to be replaced on the same timeline, as the CEO, I'm charged with putting my capital, my organization's capital, to work to optimize a return on it. I can put that into the business. Otherwise, I'm parking it and waiting for that day when the boiler is supposed to reach end of life. Well, if we've found a way to extend life, great. I can put my capital to work for the business, help it achieve its mission, whether I'm delivering healthcare, education, or other. That's what the business is here to do. And I get passionate and excited when facilities can get aligned closer to the mission of the organization, as opposed to being seen the way we so often have historically, and that's a money pit, right? What do you mean you need more people? What do you mean you need to replace asset X, Y, and Z? Now the data is being maintained. It's tied to the work we're doing, and then we can bring it back to the mission of the organization.
I think you turned the corner there, Derek. We've been talking about the traditional process. We've been talking about the way that this gets collected, the way that the facilities has been seen by other branches of the organization. So what needs to change? What is the evolution here so that we can have a better capital plan and people aren't seeing these unforeseen costs popping up? When we're talking about a sustainable condition assessment, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, and I kind of let the cat out of the bag because I tend to get excited. It's my favorite topic, but that's why we're here, right? It's a big problem, and the solution isn't as daunting as we think. But for me, it's having the right data, complete and accurate data available for the right people, whether it be the CFO, whether it be the facilities team, at the right time. That might be in the mech room, that might be in the boardroom, and anywhere in between, so we can make the best decision. So we can put the capital to work where it achieves its greatest return, where it keeps the organization aligned to its mission. Again, delivering healthcare, delivering education, optimize the tenant experience. All of these are business goals, and so often in facilities we aren't seen as being aligned to that. Kind of a secondary thought. For me, it's about that data, because if we can keep it accurate, which we can today, now we can make better decisions. And I like it when facilities sits at that table and says, we're part of achieving the goal this year, as opposed to, I can't believe how much money you're spending, Derek, the facilities team. All you do is ask for more, and I don't understand why. Now I can show why. I can show the real current condition at time of assessment and ongoing, and help the organization understand how we play that role.
Yeah, it's easier to have the conversations. It's easier to make decisions when there's trust involved. And when you trust that data, it's a whole lot easier to get things done and to actually accomplish the goals of your facility. When we talk about the data, we've probably said it 100 times already today. When we talk about accuracy of the data, it's twofold. It's not just the accuracy of what it was when we collected it, but the accuracy of what it is now. And that's what people struggle with a lot, I think, in this, when we talk about the sustainable FCA, is, okay, we collected some information, whether or not we trust it is one thing, but then how frequently is that being updated? What does it mean to have live data so that you can actually be doing your capital plan?
It just hit on. I was having a conversation late yesterday with some thought leaders in the technology space, as it pertains to exactly this digital transformation. We're talking change management, data. It used to be people, process, and tools, or people, process, technology. That makes sense. Data, really, now the conversation's evolving to data being the fourth pillar, as opposed to being kind of buried inside of typically technology, or the process might create the data, but really thinking about it. What data do I need? How do I get it? How do I maintain it? Exactly that. And it really led us to, at the beginning of this change, being very open, involving the right stakeholders within the organization, both leadership and within the facilities team a little deeper, so everybody knows what we're doing, why we're doing it, the role you play in the change, but the benefit you receive after the change. We're going to use better technology that will allow every technician and engineer in the team to be able to update the condition of an asset when they're doing maintenance on it. Or when they're in that mechanical room, they're going to go ahead and reassess the other capital assets, at least in that room, as they're there. Took us 3 minutes, but we've got an updated assessment and thus capital plan today, instead of waiting a year, 3 years, 5 years. We can also obviously get ahead of failure. That way, if we see something deteriorating faster than the plan had shown, now we can make decisions instead of reacting. It's either expensive or it's catastrophic, right? We may not be in business today. We may not be focused on our mission because we've got a foot of water in the basement. We've got a wing that's not cooled. We've got these sorts of things happening. We can't be surprised by that. The tools are making it easy, but back to the people in the process, we've got to admit to ourselves what we're doing and why, and have a plan and measure against it, and take it step by step. The big bang change management strategy of years ago is not the best one. We all know that. But if we don't document and share that change plan, we're going to revert to that strategy because it's human nature. So a lot of it really has been focused on that over the last couple of months to a year, and conversations I've been having.
Dan, before we hop into the next poll question, anything else you want to touch on about sustainable condition assessment, what that means to you?
Yeah, I think, when you're talking about the accuracy of data, you can collect as much data as you want, but if it's not accurate to the building and the equipment itself, and if your costs are not accurate to that equipment, then there is no way to build anything off of that plan. So I think if you're collecting half of a building, there is no way to have an accurate way to deploy capital to that building. You know, you can deploy to maybe your most expensive assets, or but you know, getting that data accurate in a timely fashion is going to give you the ability to build that capital plan that's accurate, that's going to be, you know, you're going to be able to deploy the right capital at, I'm losing my train of thought here. Sorry, my
right capital at the right time. Right? It's about the optimization. You know, I think that's it, Dan. We talk about it all the time. And if we're not incrementally updating it in Mike, if we can click back 2 slides, that cyclical nature of the FCA, we talk about that. That's very time consuming and expensive to do that FCA every 3 or 5 years. But if we can take bite-sized chunks and align it to the maintenance and operations efforts that are in the building every single day, we must do those things. Now it happens. It becomes part of the status quo, and it's a very tactical way to do it. It's a very easy way to do it. And change management is so much simpler that way, as opposed to, you know, somehow every 5 years we've got a little gadget and we flash it like Men in Black and it captured all the information. Maybe someday, but let's not pretend that that's reality. Let's go ahead and align the change to things we're already doing every day. We're going into the mechanical room every day. Let's go ahead and take 3 to 5 minutes and update the assessment of our assets.
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? And Dan, you were getting there. It's when you have that information available, it's actionable information. You can actually put it into the plan, which is what we're talking about here. Which brings us to our second poll question. And I think this one's going to be an easier one for everyone to agree on.
Yes. Do you have sustainable facility condition data to support your capital planning? Select one of the following. You have about 20 to 30 seconds.
Seeing a little spike in the somewhat category here, not surprised by that. I would love to interview each of you and understand what that means, but we'll talk about what we've been hearing here shortly. That's
exactly what I was thinking too, Derek. And that's the gray area that we all live in, is that starting from different places. The somewhat is the typical answer that we get, and then you drill into that a little bit more, and it means something different for every person that we talk to. And you realize that they do have a good grasp on certain areas of it, but they also understand that there's some big blind spots, and maybe they've been bit by those in the past, or maybe they haven't yet. Eventually it will catch up to everybody, and I think people know that, which is why we see that middle bar being so big here.
It is. The folks that answered yes, good for you. I'm proud of you. I'm happy for you. I'm guessing you've had an FCA or a similar project done in the last year or so to give you that confidence. Somewhat kind of depends how long ago was it, how much has changed in my portfolio size, right? I have a little more confidence if I'm running 1 million or 500,000 square feet. If I've got millions or tens of millions, there's just no way to have a personal conviction and grasp and confidence level on that condition, and then extrapolate that feeling, that emotion, that subjective opinion into a capital plan. But the larger the portfolio, or the more detached you may be, especially in a remote scenario, you may not see that facility more than once a year. You may not see that facility more than once every 3 years yourself. That tends to be the somewhat. And then the no are those folks that just feel the pain, and we empathize, we sympathize, we get it. But everybody starts there at some point, or they've got the 3-ring binder from 6 years ago and just haven't been able to run the cycle again, which kind of runs us into our next slide. I think is just that, is how do you break free from the old way, the 3 or 5 year cycle, and find a way to optimize the expense, the cost of maintaining that assessment data to inform the plan. And for us, that generally is getting the right tools in the right people's hands to be able to do that very efficiently.
Yeah, so Derek, we saw the first 2 charts here on a previous slide. Tell us what we're seeing on that bottom chart there, the maintained FCA cycle.
Yep, it's really, like I was saying, the right tools in the right people's hands to be able to do that assessment ongoing, do it in bite-sized pieces, not start from scratch. You know, that's a big thing, whether you're using the same firm or you bid it each time and you may end up with a different firm. So often we're talking to folks who every FCA, whether it be 3 or 5 years, they're starting from scratch because the data, one, may not be delivered in a way where it can actually be leveraged. Two, it's so out of date. 3 to 5 years is an eternity, regardless of your facility type, where it might actually be more efficient to start over, but it's criminal to see the expense. That's capital that can be put to use in the organization, in the facilities group to optimize that building instead of going into repeating what we did 3 years ago, 5 years ago. That's not a good return or a good value for the firm doing that work or the owner receiving that work. So what we see in that straight line graph is just, you know, taking that efficiency gain of keeping it up to date, touching that data as we operate the facility on a weekly basis. Maybe it's 30 minutes per tech, maybe it's once a month. We do it. I was just talking to somebody the other day. They do an FCA, fairly large portfolio, dozens of folks doing this work, but they are every month doing 1/12 of their portfolio. So they touch everything once a year. So it's kind of a middle ground in terms of the cycle. It gets it down to once a year, but they don't have a way today because they don't have that integrated system, Dan, that I know is your vision. You love that. They don't have that integrated system where they can tie that to the PMs, to the work orders, the inspections, the things going on in the facility. So that's kind of the next step, but at least they've got that cadence where nothing is ever more than a year out of date now. They've been running that for about 8-9 years, they said. The next step for them is to tie it to the maintenance work to really achieve that full efficiency gain and carve out a couple $1 million that we can put back into the budget.
Yeah, and apologies, there's some massive construction going on behind me. All of a sudden, I don't know what's going on, but I mean, imagine the benefits of that when, you know, like Mike explained in the very beginning, that Frankenstein building that, you know, starts old, you collected that data, you know, you've got that data, and as you move forward, additional pieces get added, additions, expansions, all that gets collected, and you're preventing yourself from having to go back and do twice the size of a condition assessment, you know, or 3 times the size of a condition assessment, because you're going to have that data continually updated as you go throughout the future. So huge benefit with this type of maintained condition assessment cycle.
Yeah, and I think that's a good transition, Dan, into, you know, we don't want to sit here and tell everybody how bad the process is and just complain about it. There's got to be a better way. So when we're looking forward, what does this process look like? And I think you touched on it right there. It's not just the gains of it and thinking that we're going to do 20 FCAs in a given year. It's the fact that if you maintain that data, it's easier to do the FCA every single day. You're just doing little bits and pieces here and there as they pop up. You don't have to dedicate this whole drawn out process to it because it's something that you're maintaining on a continuous basis. But when we're thinking about that, there is, you know, the reason we're here, there's a technology component associated with that. So when we're taking a look at the future of capital planning, the future of FCAs, how do we maximize technology to help with this process?
Is that for Dan or me?
I'll kick it over to Dan.
Yeah. You know, like I said before, having all of these tools in one place to access is one. Keeping them from being disconnected from each other makes it really easy to make a decision on the type of technology that you want to deploy to gather data, associate costs, build your reports, and then build your capital plan, and then create an actionable plan, and then create action on it. You know, it's not just getting the capital plan. You can say, hey, this is what we're going to do. But if you can't create action on that, you don't have the tools to create action on that, then nothing is going to happen. And you're going to be starting over and doing it all over again in a year or two. So Having that single pane of glass technology is the vision, and that's what we want to provide. Is getting people a one-stop shop and a one choice, and making it easy.
Yeah, you mentioned that single pane of glass frequently, right? It's data collection in the field, it's information that we're gathering from it, and then it's actionable items that we can take based off of that information. And I think that's what we're taking a look at here. Derek, when you're thinking about maximizing technology, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I think it's, and Dan's incredibly modest, which I appreciate, but that's the vision. It's also now the reality. I think that's the exciting part about being here in 2023. That mobile technology, right? Wherever you are, you've got technology, including software, to allow you to collect, organize, and drill into information. But as you're updating that in the field, your CFO can be back in the office across the country even and see these graphs updating, right? I know that the East Coast team is out doing their assessments this week, real time. I can see things changing. If I'm delivering these sorts of things, I can even do that within the firm delivering the services, and the efficiency there is not having to wait. But the ultimate value to me is real time. I can, whether I'm in the field or in the office, I can see this right here, right now. I can see what has changed. I can click into very poor and see, wow, my HVAC systems across the board are going to need attention sooner than we thought the last time we assessed this. That's all connected. That's all. There's no repeat data entry, manual error, any of those things. Technology today and software specifically can optimize all of that so we can spend our time on the insights. What is this telling me? What do I need to do within the business as a result of this? And I become proactive and I look forward. Talking to CFOs, they want to look out the windshield down the road. They don't want to be looking out the rear view mirror in the car, reacting to things that just happened. This removes the reaction often. We're never going to remove all of that, but boy, the business is better when it's seeing down the road, sees bumps in the road potentially year 2 or 3 in that bottom right graph. I've got a lot of red and light red there. That's not ideal. But if my capital plan has been aiming at that for the last couple of years, it's my reality and I have a plan, as opposed to, oh dear, what are we going to do? I don't have that capital. I've got to stretch that. Let's be realistic. Cost of capital is going up. Lots of things going on in the economy that aren't necessarily positive. I've got to have a plan I trust. There's enough things out of my control. This is something now that is in our control using the right tools. That's exciting, because 5-10 years ago, that was certainly not the case, or it was so expensive to do it that it just didn't happen, right?
Yeah, and you hit on it there. It's better, you do better, right? And we're looking at year 2 in that graph down below. That is our reality. That is the condition of these assets that we are taking a look at, and they should be replaced or maintained, or there's going to be big expenses popping up then. The question is, do we know about it? Have we planned for it? And if we plan for it, then it's something that we can overcome much easier than finding out about it once they've already failed. So,
yeah, this also allows you to get a little bit more creative. When you have the right technology, you can get creative with what you want to replace. There's a great example. Somebody told me that they were doing their insights and they were digging into their information, and they narrowed down to all their HVAC assets, and then they narrowed it down by manufacturer. Well, what they were finding out is they were seeing a pattern with a certain manufacturer that was very poor. They were the same age as the other manufacturers, but for some reason, this manufacturer was always in very poor state. So that gave them the ability to narrow that down and then decide, you know what? I'm not going to use that manufacturer for my HVAC assets anymore, because they don't last as long as they say they should. And that's going to save you capital in the long run, because you're able to make those smart decisions with the data and the technology that you have. So it allows you to get a lot more creative in that planning process.
Yeah, I love that, Dan, because that's what completes the loop, right? Now we're back to speccing better equipment at the front end of the cycle, which means we can optimize the capital plan moving forward as that next building or the next 10 years plays out for the organization. And all of a sudden, facilities as a strategic partner in the business, again, that's the chair we want to be in.
Yeah.
having the right tools in our hands from a software perspective to make that possible today, a reality today.
And that living data allows you to make historical decisions. You can't have historical decisions unless you have that living data. So if I have a bunch of historical data that I can go off of, like that the example, the HVAC, you know, if I can look back and see what's been failing and what's not been failing, I can make way better equipment decisions in the future and asset decisions on what I want to deploy when I replace, when I renew. You know, maybe there's PMs out there that I'm doing too frequently. It doesn't increase the life of my asset anyway. Maybe I see PMs that I do PMs 3 times a year on a piece of equipment. Maybe I only need to do it once, you know, and I'm seeing those patterns. So having that historical information is going to help you build that path forward as well.
Yeah, and I think as we're taking a look at this, right, where you've been talking about efficiency as well, and I think that if there's one thing that we've proven in this episode here is that the 3 of us can talk about data and we can talk about this process, FCA's capital planning, for as long as anybody will allow us to. I do want to recap some of these points here and make sure that we let the other folks that are on this get some of their questions in there as well, so we can continue this conversation with anybody who wants to have it with us. So as we go on to this final slide here, I think that we've got some of our main takeaways prior to hopping into a Q&A session. But when we're taking a look at this, the collection of that data and how efficiently and how accurately you can do it is a great starting point, and it's usually one of the biggest question marks as you begin this capital planning process. As we get better with technology, as it becomes more prevalent in the industry and in the field, we can use that to modify the FCAs of old and turn them into something that is much more fluid and living and useful and beneficial for capital planning and just for facility management in general. And you know, I think I've summarized the 4 here, but when Derek, you really rounded it off last when you say, when you begin with this greater information, right? Dan's story about finding the faulty manufacturer, now that just enhances us for the next capital planning process as well. So it really does come down to the data, right? We've said it now 1,000 times, the efficiency of it, the accuracy of it, and then how accessible is it for us to be able to use that data to actually do what we need to do to keep our buildings up and running. So I'll let you guys put any final thoughts in there before we go into questions from the crowd.
I think you wrapped it up well, Mike. I'm kind of jonesing to get to the questions. You know, how do I get started? Some questions there that I think are pretty pressing. I think the urgency and the desire to step into a better way is definitely present, looking at comments and questions on the back end of the webinar here. So Dan, anything to add, or should we jump into Q&A?
Let's jump into Q&A.
Awesome. All right, awesome. Gentlemen, thank you so much for this presentation, and thank you to our attendees for sending in questions for our Q&A. As a quick reminder, clicking on the orange arrow on the left side of your control panel will either expand or collapse the control panel, so please be sure the panel is expanded so you can access the question box, and please continue to submit any questions that you may have. Okay, so to get started, what are practical first steps to start having sustainable facility data is our first question.
You know, I want to jump in. Dan, you want to go?
Yeah, you want me to jump? Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah. Dan, you're the one with the experience in the field.
Yeah, I mean, from my experience, the place to start is a condition assessment. You want to collect that data. You need to find a way to efficiently collect that data. And you need to find a way to accurately add costs to that data and get it prepped for a capital plan. You have to have robust reporting. You have to be able to create an actionable plan on that capital, the capital that you're going to deploy. And but to start, it's mostly always condition assessments is where I've seen it.
And the phrase was sustainable, right? They used the language that we had in this presentation. It's got to be something that once you collect it, once you trust that information, you then have access to it and you can pull from it and you can rearrange it and view it in different ways so that you can actually use the information that you have collected to start this capital planning process and take a look at things in a bunch of different ways that might benefit your organization.
Yeah, I think who is going to do it, right? If you have the luxury or benefit of having staff that's going to do it, it's what tool are we going to do? So when we capture it, it's in a place where we can keep it up to date. Or if we're contracting with someone to do that assessment for us, great. But let's prescribe an integrated software solution where the assessment, the insights and report, and then the go forward, right? The ability to keep those assets updated and potentially also track our work orders against those assets is all in one place. That's how you get started. Without it, you're just recreating, the past. So yeah, could not agree more with Dan. It's also the most efficient way now because it serves multiple purposes. It can help the maintenance team and the capital plan all at once. What do I have? Where is it? What should I be doing to it? How often should I be doing it? And then track that condition over time.
Perfect. Moving on to the next question. What is a good data timeline so that you spend time collecting enough data to work with, but that you're not risking anything becoming outdated?
That's a good question, right? We want to get as much detail as possible, but not have analysis paralysis and spend so much time in the field that by the time we're compiling our reports and our findings, the thing that we collected is now 6 months old and potentially out of date, like the story we had earlier. Dan, again, I'm going to defer to you with your expertise in the field. What do you think is the preferred timeline so I'll two-part. How would you view this in terms of what do you think has been the expected timeline and what do you think could be the ideal timeline?
Yeah, I mean, it varies depending on, the size and scale of project. You have people who are doing, multiple buildings in their portfolio and they're trying to collect everything all at once so they can build a capital plan around an entire portfolio, which is obviously a lot more difficult and requires a lot more investment dollars in that data collection. And typically is to deploy a condition assessment company that does this professionally. You definitely don't want to plan for take 6 months to plan for next year and the year and beyond, because you will see that cycle continually start itself over. So if it takes you 6 months to plan, then you're going to find yourself starting back at square one again, taking 6 months to plan. So something's got to change. So we've seen that happen where they get 60% of their assets collected, or 60% or maybe they get all of their assets collected, but they don't get any of their condition or costs collected. So it just goes on the shelf. Surprises happen. They end up spending way more money than they should. And they just continue to do their PM and maintenance work, as things break. And we all know that creates a domino effect and eventually explodes and the building crumbles. So I would say, to answer that question within a reasonable timeline is, they try to get it done within, 1 to 3 months is what I've seen. People try to get things done for maybe a couple buildings. But it is dependent on the size and scale that you're trying to collect.
Yeah, I think that's it, right? Like there's a lot of different starting points depending on the type of facility you're taking a look at or what your portfolio may look at. But the biggest thing is maximizing the amount of time and really trimming down the amount of time from collection in the field to estimation to insights to actionable plan. And that can vary depending on how big the facility is. But we all know that there is fat that can be cut out in that process.
Yeah, I think we often know where the problems are enough to draw that line on what we prioritize, what we gather initially. Let's start there because we get going and then we can get into that cycle of continuously assessing and updating the information. When I'm in the room, I add an asset or two and it incrementally, it's an incremental addition of data, but it's an exponential growth of value with that approach. Heard an executive the other day talk about it seems like we could go from months to weeks or years to months in the time it takes to get value because of the efficiency of that data collection process. Grab my iPad, go out, I'm moving through the building. We're making things easy. We've got OCR tools. We've got voice to text. We've got capturing pictures. I can separate tasks. All this happens so quickly. We've seen, thinking late last year, Dan, we had 2 to 3 million square feet, I think was the number. We had a client capture that in, I think it was 2 weeks. Now there was work back in the office because they really thought about who's available on the team to go out and do that collection, but they were thoughtful about that. And then they did some of that assessment work based on the imagery, based on the information captured in the field. It was about getting out there and getting back as quick as possible. So they shrunk that versus maybe spending a little more time in the field. But also I can be capturing information, and in a SaaS platform, I can have the other half of my team anywhere looking at the images, looking at my notes, looking at those things, and moving that through the process. And so now it's no longer this long sequential dependent workflow, but rather compress it. It's not just the efficiency of collecting, it's the efficiency of processing the data and reaching those insights. And that's when light bulbs go off. That's when CFOs jump in and get excited, and facility leaders get excited about the same thing at the same time. And that's something we haven't experienced as often as we all wish we could have in our careers, but that's the reality of today.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. I believe we have time for one more question. We have one here. What are some strategies to help account for more localized factors in our capital planning that might change estimated costs or life cycle?
And did you want to take that one?
I think, if I'm hearing that question right, I think it's around maybe geographical locations, environments. I think there's obviously going to be different costs in different areas. So the cost of your capital that you're going to need to deploy on an asset would be more in Chicago than it would be in Dallas, for example. So being able to collect that data accurately and efficiently is going to help you put those cost adjustments and those increases in values in time and labor, or resource deployment, whatever that may be. But you need technology and tools to be able to quickly change that so that you can see it. Maybe you have buildings in all over the United States, and maybe even internationally. You need to be able to quickly change the capital plan based on labor rates, or based on the cost to install something. Those are tools that you're going to need as a part of that capital plan. And I hope that's what the question was, in my understanding of it, at least.
Yeah.
I had a little flashback to 18 months ago. It was, as things were pretty crazy out there, supply chain, rising costs, labor, materials. How do I take this in the system and do it, a little bit on the inside of the Akita box? We looked at it and said we need to allow people in the software to very efficiently make those adjustments, right? Material, labor, add on. If the boiler is down in the basement where it often is, I need to be able to add a couple of grand to cut that thing up and get it out. It's not just replace the boiler. I need to be able to do that at an asset level, but also at a macro level across my portfolio. I need to be able to make those adjustments. So those are some of the finer, feature functions within our software specifically that allows that to be super easy to address that question. Because boy, is it painful to go in and update 800 of something in a spreadsheet. Yes, you can write your formulas to do that as well, but you can do that from a central command. The CFO or an executive can do that, and it just automatically flows through, as opposed to potentially making errors in those updates.
I think it also comes back to the frequency and the ability to do this frequently, right? When we talk about those charts of the 3-year FCA, the 5-year FCA versus the continuous FCA, when things change, as they always do, you have the ability to go in and modify quickly and have a plan for it, as opposed to getting caught off guard. You have a 5-year capital plan that you're not touching, and supply chain issues pop up in year 2 of that. When something needs to be replaced, you don't have the most up-to-date information on it. You hadn't really adjusted or accounted for that frequency, that ability to go in and quickly modify and take a look at these things, and to know what's coming with the latest information, not information from 5 years ago. That's going to help a lot.
Awesome, wonderful. It looks like we're just about out of time. Gentlemen, thank you so much for this discussion today. And thank you to AkitaBox for sponsoring this webinar. And thank you, of course, to our audience for attending. A recording from today's session will be made available on our magazine's website, facilityexecutive.com, and at akitabox.com. Thank you and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.